I left Google in 2006. I had worked at Google from the time it was probably a couple hundred employees till I left. We were originally simulating the weather, and then we sold weather insurance to business owners, and then eventually focused on agriculture, and in that process began building software models that related all the variables in farming, made predictions about outcomes, and used that to provide insurance to farmers. But the underlying software models, we actually turned into a suite of analytics tools that farmers could use to track their operation and make better decisions to optimize outcome. And the company was acquired by Monsanto in 2013. So, it was, I think a lot of people said it was kind of a early, like the digitization of agriculture was clearly kind of underway. All of this digital information when we first started Climate Corp was very hard to come by. When I started the company in 2006, the first thing I did was I bought a CD-ROM of weather data. I paid $10,000 for the weather data. It was 17 megabytes of data in like a little CSV file. It was like rainfall and temperature for 200 weather stations going back 30 years for, by day. Small amount of data. It seems crazy to spend 10 grand and get on a CD-ROM. And that was our first data set. And then we, on average, increased data use and data ingest by 40x on average every year for 7 years. So 40 to the 7th power is how much the data use increased. And so, there was radar data, satellite imagery, farm equipment data, soil testing data, soil survey data, all of this digitization of the physical world was underway. And it wasn't just in agriculture, it's obviously in all industries, but particularly in agriculture, we started to see the opportunity for using all of this data to build predictive models using statistics that could make inference and make predictions about what would happen under different conditions. And that could be turned into hopefully easy to use software tools to help farmers be informed and have some tools at their disposal to optimize outcomes.
That's great, thank you. And you sold that, when was that, 2016?
2013.
2013, okay.
Yeah. 10 years ago.
10 years ago. From there, you went on to found the production board, right? Can you talk a little bit about what the production board is, what you all do, and what the focus is?
Production board is an investment holding company. So it's my capital, and then I had some conversations with Larry Page, the founder of Alphabet. And so we set it up as a partnership between myself and Alphabet initially. They put some money in, I put some money in, and then we put some additional capital in from folks like Bill Gates' family office, BlackRock, Morgan Stanley, Bailey Gifford, Koch Industries, Grupo Bimbo. It's a kind of a mix of strategics, long-range institutional investors, and family offices. And then we've used our capital to start businesses and to make investments in businesses, largely, I would say, at the intersection of digital and biology, mostly food and agriculture, some efforts in human health and therapeutics and so on, and some other kind of more traditional software, but really heavily focused on digital meets biology as the core theme, where there's a lot of transformative, technologies that, can change the markets that we all talk about.
Are there any portfolio companies that you're particularly excited about that you want to talk about at all?
I did announce a couple days ago that I am now taking over the CEO role at one of our companies. So I've stepped in to run the business. It's a plant gene editing company called Ohalo. We started that company a little over 4 years ago. We've put tens of millions of dollars of capital into it as the sole investor. We're the majority owner when we start these businesses. And then it was kind of a moonshot project, meaning gene editing is this technology that I'm sure many in this room are familiar with, and the potential for applying gene editing to agriculture is significant. You can change the biology of plants very specifically in a way that wasn't possible prior to the discovery of CRISPR-Cas9. And we came up with some ideas for if we did a whole bunch of different specific edits, we could change how plants do certain things. I'm being very coy for a reason because we haven't been public about what we do there. But it was the concept we had was a pretty big moonshot project that we could have a massive gain in yield if we were successful. And then it took a long time to get all these things working, get all the pieces together. We weren't sure if it was going to work. And then finally, a couple of months ago, it was like, holy shit, this thing works. And so now I feel very excited that this is like the thing that I got to make sure this works. I'm going to go in. I'm running it now.
So you're committing just about all your time specifically to this?
Yeah, we have about, we have a bunch of investments. I'd say we have about a dozen sizable investments at TPB, and then I'm going to stay on 2 of our boards. One is Lavoro Agro, which is the largest agricultural retailer in Latin America. We had a SPAC vehicle before it was a 4-letter word, so don't hold it against me, that we used to take Lavoro public, and we invested $100 million in that business. About a $2.5 billion top line U.S. Revenue business, a roll-up of mom and pop retailers in distributors down in Brazil mostly. So I'm staying on the board there, and then I'm staying on the board of another company called Pattern Ag, which is one of the companies we started. It reads the DNA in the soil to predict pest and disease risk in farmers' fields and helps them make recommendations about what to do. So I'm staying involved in those 2 businesses, and then my team is managing the rest of our portfolio, and we're gonna, I'm gonna spend all my time driving value out of Ohalo.
That's great. And I know you've been in stealth mode for, what was it, 4 years on Ohalo?
Yeah.
And just recently, just a couple days ago, announced this move. Is there anything you can share just about specifically what you're doing, or maybe more broadly? There's a few genetics companies in the audience. There's a few food tech and ag tech companies in the audience. Can you talk a little bit about just what has happened over the last few years with gene editing tools, the progression that's been made, and what you feel like you can do today versus what you maybe couldn't do years ago, and the opportunity just going forward, and what it means? Maybe connect the dots a little bit for people in the room of what this means for our food and ag supply chain.
So I guess we could go back to the concept of plant breeding, where you see some phenotype, some physical characteristic of a plant that you like. You want to make that the standard, and you cross that into another plant, and you try and cross plants together, breed them together that have specific traits, and then you select the winners that have both traits, and you keep doing that work, and that's what plant breeding historically has been. We're largely limited to what nature gives us in terms of the traits that we see in the environment, and then the mutations, the genetic mutations that happen in all of us, but in all plants from generation to generation, that cause a new trait to emerge. So, it's been trying to find needles in haystacks for 9,000 years for humans. And that's what plant breeding has largely been. The big innovation in plant breeding was in the 1920s in the US with the technology known as hybridization, which was really plant breeding, but they realized that you could take the 2 sets of chromosomes in a plant, like in corn, and get both sets of chromosomes to have all the traits you want to have in the plant by inbreeding the plant with itself for about 6 years. And if you did that, now you would have all the traits on both chromosomes. So you could cross 2 of those inbred lines together, and they would now get all the traits from here and all the traits from here, and the yield would go way up. That was a major discovery in the 20s, and it launched all the seed companies. And that's largely the value of seed companies today is hybridization and breeding. So that was the biggest technology in breeding. Fast forward, not much changed until GMOs and transgenes. So this was when we were able to generate recombinant DNA, so make little DNA and then blast it into the cell. Like, how do you get that DNA into the cell that does a specific thing, a little gene? And remember, genes make a protein. And so you're trying to get a gene that makes a protein into a cell of a plant. So now that plant will make a specific protein that does a specific thing. And Monsanto launched things like BT corn, which is a gene from a bacteria that makes a protein that kills a worm. So now the worms eat the corn, they die. So GMOs created like all these advances in yield and reduction in cost associated with putting this, novel gene into but it was really very brute force. It was like, take the gene, jam it in there. And it had nothing to do with breeding. In 2012, arguably either George Church's lab at the Broad Institute at Harvard or Jennifer Doudna's lab at Berkeley discovered CRISPR-Cas systems. And this was CRISPR. You guys, anyone not heard of CRISPR? So right? So suddenly we could, for the first time ever, go into a genome and make a very specific edit, make a specific change to the DNA without necessarily needing to breed and try and catch the thing we wanted to have happen. So it kind of opens up this whole window of opportunity in agriculture and human biology and other biological research where we could go and do specific things. We could make new genes, we could make new proteins. But in plants and agriculture, the idea is we could start to edit the genome of the plants to do specific things that otherwise would take thousands of years to do through breeding, which is random mutations and selection and all this stuff. It's really fucking hard.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, great, you could read about it in the textbook, but then you got to pay these guys all these license fees at Harvard and Berkeley, and shit doesn't work, and it's like really difficult. So that's been a decade. So over the last decade, there are now hundreds of alternatives to CRISPR-Cas9 that have been discovered that you can use to go edit genes without paying the license fees, that you can do so in a more specific way, that you can change single letters in DNA, and that you can do it in a much lower cost way, in a much more effective way, efficiency gain. So all of these are starting to kind of compound, where suddenly the idea, the theory 10 years ago is becoming more of the reality, which is labs can start up a gene editing capability and go edit the genome, fairly cheaply and see the results, and all the stuff that we're modeling on computers because we can get DNA sequencing done for nothing now. And we've got all these ideas on experiments we want to run. Boom, we can order the DNA, stick it in there, do the edits, and then, see the results. So that's kind of a big thing that's happening. Guys like Monsanto, now Bayer Crop Science, they're spending like $1 billion a year on plant breeding. And they're on average getting 1% increase in yield per year. So gene editing kind of totally, flips upside down this whole opportunity set, which is that maybe using like software, like you're writing in a word processor, you can change the genome and bump up yield and do so with very little cost. You don't need to go do all the breeding stuff. So that's kind of the theory, and that's kind of, what's happened over the 1,000 years, 100 years, 10 years, and what's changing now. So it's a great kind of accelerated thing. What does this mean for agriculture?
Yeah.
So there's no reason that plants can't be twice as productive. Okay, so if you put the right set of genes together, the plants can suck up twice as much nitrogen, they can absorb twice as much water, they can be more photosynthetic efficient, they can be more effective with utilizing the soil, et cetera, et cetera. The biology of plants is profound. The potential biology of plants is even more profound. All the shit that could be done if we fast forwarded evolution by 2 million years, but what if we did it in 2 years? And so there's no reason that we can't take 2 billion acres of farmland today and double the calories and reduce the nitrogen use and reduce the carbon footprint and reduce the water use and so on and so forth. I mean, I can give some examples of, like, one of our projects is in a plant where we've now reduced water use by 50%, increased profitability for the farmer by 50%. And so you get more per acre, like instantly through one gene edit. And so that's the sort of stuff that we're seeing as a potential. And this is not GMO. You're not taking like bacterial DNA and putting it in the thing. You're just telling the plant to turn this gene off and turn this gene on that it already has in its DNA. And you're making slight modifications to that gene that otherwise would have shown up in nature if you just kept doing breeding for a millennia or two. So that's why it's so exciting, is that we see the potential, like right in front of us right now, to go and make transformations to nearly every species of plant that we grow in agriculture, increase efficiency, reduce the footprint. Pretty profound, pretty powerful.
Yeah, thank you for that. And last question just on this. So, the common statistic we often hear is, the global world population continues to increase, our arable land continues to decline. These types of technologies ultimately will be necessary to feed our population globally over time. Do you buy into that? Do you think this is critically important from that perspective? I
mean, there's some bullshit, like arable land declining, fits a narrative, but I don't know, they're like some places adding a lot of acres. We just don't need as many acres, fundamentally.
Because we're getting more efficient.
If you get more efficient and the market demand isn't there, I mean, we see this, like there's a reduction in corn acres planted this year, if you're in the Western markets. So the market adjusts to demand. But I think like we are resource abundant. I don't think we're like resource short on Earth. Pretty cool sphere we have. It's got like water and energy, and like we're like super inefficient in how we use the molecules and how we convert them. Because what you're really doing is converting a molecule from one form to another.
Right.
You're taking like nitrogen out of the atmosphere and you're turning it into protein. Like you're sticking it with carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen to make protein in a biological organism. And you can program that organism to be way more efficient, and that organism can be more efficient with the right tools. So yeah, I mean, I'm pretty optimistic. I'm not worried about like resource constraints on Earth, but I think like humans have a profound ability to innovate and to drive productivity. We always have. I mean, if you think like agriculture was really the first human technology. It was like we walked around the earth and ate whatever was lying on the ground. And then one day we realized we could take a seed and put it in the ground and grow stuff. It's like, oh, that's cool. Now we're making stuff. And then we evolved that system to what it is today. It's really incredible. The increase in productivity, I think, outstrips the challenges that we're facing. And that unlocks all these other applications, all these other opportunities. So, we could talk about those, but I'm pretty optimistic.
Yeah, great. One of the things about your background that I didn't mention, so you're a co-host of the All In podcast. What is it? Why do you do it? How did it come about?
I don't know why I do it. So I may not do it for much longer. I find it can be a pain in the ass, but it's a podcast and some people listen to it, but I'm not like going to talk. I'm not going to promote the podcast. It's
one thing
love it or hate it.
Yeah. One thing you've talked a lot about on it is artificial intelligence. And I'd be curious to get your take, because I know through TPB as well, you've spent some time in AI. Can you talk about the advancement in artificial intelligence and more specifically link it back to what does it mean for food and ag? So I know one of the things you more recently talked about was DeepMind's new weather forecasting model, maybe as one example. But can you talk a little bit about what's happening in AI, what it means for food and ag going forward?
Yeah, so in food and ag. So if you think about AI, let's just strip the term away, because there have been a lot of hypey terms used over the decades. I gave an example, like in the 60s, there was a computer that could play chess, and someone was like, AI is here. It's like, intelligent computer is here. Can you believe it? Like, it is now like us. And think about that computer to where we are today. The big breakthrough over the last couple of years are what are called these LLMs, these large language models that are really trained to predict text. So it's designed to predict the next word in a sentence. And that's what the model is. So all models are predictive. They're either trying to predict a pixel on an image, and then multiple images, you have video, or they're trying to predict a word, or they're trying to predict something else, like the value on a graph node, which is the weather forecasting example. So predictive models require data, and then an approach to building a statistical representation of the future using that data. And you have to write that approach in software. So statistics is what we use to make predictions. And there's lots of different statistics you can use to make predictions. So lots of data has shown up, like we talked about in earlier, weather data and all this stuff. But really just think about the chat GPT example. All this text exists on the internet. So someone went around and gathered all that text up. And then the breakthrough in models that happened is this paper out of Google called the Transformer paper a couple of years ago, which is a whole new approach to the statistical part. How do you get these models trained? How do you solve the statistics needed to make a prediction? And they were really good. All of a sudden, they could make predictions on a sentence, and the sentence looked like the computer was talking to you. So when a computer is talking to you through a chat interface, it's just the computer predicting the next word in the sentence, and that next word usually has some meaning to us because it's trained on all the other things humans have said on the internet. And now Google's doing it with imagery and other stuff. So the applications of this approach of this training capability that we now have on any data set is to make better predictions about the future. The key is what data is available. So in agriculture, the more data we're getting about the soil, about farm equipment, about satellite imagery, the better we're going to be able now to make a prediction and make a recommendation to the farmer about what to do to optimize an outcome on that farm. I don't know about the rest of the food supply chain, but those are all kind of industrial processes that can be better predicted. But I wouldn't use the term AI as there's this kind of profound leap. That's just because we've seen these chat models that look really cool.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, oh my God, these chat models and these image generation models, and they're all like really profound in their own right. But they're all on the spectrum of what we've been doing for 50 years, which is using statistics to make predictions from data.
Right.
And that's kind of, we just have more data and we're better at making the predictions through the statistics now.
Yeah, that's great. By the way, I should have mentioned at the beginning, so one thing we want to do is have the Q&A with the audience as well. So here in just a few moments, would love to open it up to any audience questions specifically for Dave. So there will be some mic runners walking around, and just be prepared if you have any questions for Dave. We'll open that up here very shortly. So I want to just get a few of your predictions. You see a lot of different companies. You see a lot of different technologies. As you look into 2024 onwards, what are you most excited about specifically within food and ag? What technologies are you most excited about? What potential do you see to really change the landscape within these markets?
On the agriculture side, I kind of think about 4 buckets of technology. One is digital tools. The other one is equipment, which is like a critical area of technology investment, and then biologics, and then gene editing or seed. On the digital tool side, I'm not super optimistic. I don't have a lot of investments there. Yeah. Right? These tools commoditize very quickly because the data gets so cheap. Everyone can make software all of a sudden. Where's your moat? Where's your advantage? So in the digital space, it's very hard unless you have a unique business model or distribution or unique data set that no one else has that can persist an advantage, meaning over time you get more data and that gives you more of an advantage and you have this flywheel effect. That's a very hard place to build a valuable business. Even though I sold a company in the space, I would argue that was a one-off. I got lucky. But generally I would say that is a very hard business model to make as an investor, make money. In farm equipment, I think that there's a lot of interesting opportunities, but like a lot of people are focusing on automation and machine vision. And again, those underlying technologies are also commoditizing. And so it's very hard to build an independent business there and compete. Deere and CNH and like everyone's going to catch up there. Or they end up being niche. And so you can make money, but you're not going to build as an investor in venture, you have to kind of think about, can this get to be tens of billions, right? Not like, which isn't necessarily the way to think about things. And then in biologics, I think there's a big opportunity, right? So in Brazil, at Lavoro Agro, we see the biologics market growing 30% a year. And biologics, just so everyone knows, like in agriculture, if you don't know, farmers buy seed, they buy fertilizer, and they buy crop protection products, which is like herbicide, fungicide, and insecticide. And those are all typically synthetic chemicals. Biologics are proteins made by microbes or microbes themselves, little bacteria or little yeast cells that can replace fertilizer, herbicide, fungicide, or insecticide. And so the biologics market has had fits and starts. In the US, it hasn't really had a great outcome. Monsanto burnt about $1 billion in a bioag alliance with Novozymes. It was a bit of a disaster. And there's a lot of reasons we can talk about that. But we're now seeing incredible sophistication in discovering new microbes or discovering new proteins from microbes because of the low cost of DNA sequencing. We can suddenly see into the microbial world in a way that we could never see before because it's so cheap and we can gather so much data and mine it. And then finding the right place to put microbes and put those biologics. The way Monsanto and other big ag input companies have thought about biologics, and this is really good for the environment, by the way, right? You're reducing the carbon footprint, you're reducing the cost, et cetera. You're putting a biological system in the ground or on the seed. But the way that a lot of ag input companies think about stuff is let's make a product and sell it to everyone. And the reality is, just like in personalized medicine, we need to see agriculture evolve to like personalized agriculture. Every inch of the ground is different. And so I want to be able to understand what's going on in this part of the field and this part of the field and put the right products or the right biologics in that part of the field and don't put them over there because they're not going to work. So as we're figuring that out, the ROI goes way up. And suddenly these products take hold and the market takes off. And so that's what we're starting to see in biologics. And I think that's still largely a white space. There's a lot of opportunity to build and compete there, and a lot of value to be created. Because you can totally go after fertilizer, herbicide, fungicide, insecticide, and eat up large amounts of the market. And then gene editing, I think, is like, I think that's the bee's knees, right? Like, that's going to be it. So we're going to totally reinvent the seed industry, and it can participate in value creation all across the value chain. So that's in ag. And then in food, I mean, obviously everyone had this hot thing of plant-based proteins.
Right.
Consumers don't want it, no surprise. And then, no offense to anyone in the market, but I just think it was who was it? I think it was Givaudan who was like, years ago, they were like, I know everyone thinks that this is going to keep growing, but we think it's going to stop growing with all the plant-based proteins. And I think they were pretty prescient in their observation of the market data. It was kind of a fad. Everyone tried it for a while, but if it was more expensive and it didn't taste as good, it was going to run into a wall at some point.
Right.
And so plant-based proteins are just really challenged right now, and I'm not sure I see a path to success there. And then all the fermentation-based proteins, I'm involved in a bunch of that stuff, and man, is it a shit show.
In what sense?
Like the unit economics. So, ultimately, the fermentation, right, where you engineer a yeast or other microbial cell to make an animal protein, you put it in a fermenter, you feed it sugar, it eats the sugar and it makes the protein. The idea is that the biophysical efficiency of a microbe is better than the animal. Like, the microbe can make more protein per unit in than a chicken or a cow or something. So this should work. Right? From a first principles perspective, this should work. But as everyone gets to scale up in these businesses, once they try to start making big tanks, the actual cost per kilogram goes up. You didn't realize that you can only fill the tank 70% of the way. You didn't realize that you have to run it an extra 2 days, so suddenly your output per day goes down by 30, 40%. All of these factors compound. And all of a sudden, the cost goes up by 5x, 10x, and you're like, oh shit. I can't really go compete.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that across the space, right? And cellular meat's got an even bigger hill to climb.
Right.
Because their cost of inputs is so much higher, like orders of magnitude higher. So I'm still optimistic long term. I just don't know the timing. Because again, from a first principles perspective, animal proteins made with microbes or with cellular meat should be cheaper. But there's a lot of stuff we got to fix. All these little technology tweaks we got to make this whole thing work. And I don't know if that's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years.
But you think at some point it gets there?
Yeah, the first principles are like, yeah, I can go to the moon. It's hard to go to the fucking moon, that's the challenge, right? Like, I apologize for my language. Right? Yeah. It's like a jacket conference. Like you're not wearing a jacket.
I pride myself.
Everyone else is wearing
a
jacket.
One. Yeah.
It's like business casual. I thought it was like a jacket.
Yeah. Any questions from the audience, by the way? Yeah. We'll bring you a mic.
Fascinating. Thank you very much. I think we're looking at the next Norman Borlaug. My husband and I are ag economists, and we're farmers and food processors. And there's always a running joke among the ag economists that our price of wheat would go up if we put our wheat breeders in jail.
Yeah.
And, the CBD market in Oregon, farmers overproduced that market in literally 1 year and drove the price into the ground. How will you protect your investment and not allow that to happen, by oversupplying very price-sensitive markets? Yeah. And then what about the consumer acceptance of your products? The GMO didn't go over that well among many of the consumers. What are you thinking about there?
Yeah, gene edit. So I'll start with the second point. It's a great question. So how do we? I'll just repeat. It's like how do you prevent gene editing from becoming GMOs? This anti-technology backlash. You guys may follow this or not, but in the U.S. we don't regulate gene-edited plants like we do GMOs because you're not introducing transgenes. You're not introducing DNA that's not native to the plant, which is what GMOs are. They're transgenic. And so you're making modifications to the plant that otherwise would have happened through breeding and natural mutation. And you're not introducing other DNA. So you can turn off a gene that you could otherwise breed out of the plant. And so it's and you're not introducing new pest risk into the field. So that's the criteria that's used by the USDA, the EPA, and the FDA in the US. It's been adopted in Canada. And funny enough, the market that everyone was most worried about, the EU, the farmers there started to recognize that they're going to be left behind because gene editing is creating such an accelerated pace of breeding outcomes that if they're not going to be able to participate, they're going to lose out and they're going to start to lose market share. And so farmers in the EU began to push back on these points. And now the EU, as of earlier this year, has agreed to adopt the US standards as well. It's not been officially done yet, but it will be done in the next few months. There will be consumer groups that will show up and they'll say gene editing is gene editing and GMOs don't fuck with the food supply, you're going to kill us all, you don't know what you're doing. And I think we have to do a better job this time around than we did last time with GMOs. Trying to help people understand that the way I described it, we are accelerating breeding that we're already doing with plants, and that's good for the planet, it's good for smallholder farmers, it's good for consumers, it's good for the environment, et cetera, et cetera. We're not, and it is breeding accelerated. So I think that's going to be important. But the good thing is, I think this is actually more of a shadow condition than it is like front and center. Like, look at my gene-edited crops, I did it, because it's going to become ubiquitous. It's effectively going to be everywhere. Every organization, every seed company, everyone will be using gene-edited crops. And as a result, just like plant breeding became the technology of its heyday, hybridization was a technology in the 20s that became the standard, this will become a standard. And then it'll stop being this like special one-off crazy thing that we're doing. Now, with respect to your first question, I think that there are going to be perturbations in markets no matter what. The only way I can kind of address the point is there's market supply, there's market demand. If the demand's not there, the price will go down, people will stop planting, the market adjusts. If you can generate more of a supply and new markets can emerge because prices go down, that's what we saw in corn, is all these other applications for corn that didn't exist in the 1920s as yields went up and supply went up, and we can turn corn into all sorts of stuff, like, for example, bioplastics. And so if we can get the price per bushel below $3, but we can all make twice as much corn and make it carbon negative, it's good for the planet. We get rid of using oil to make plastic. We can use bioplastics to do it. Better for farmers, they'll make more money per acre. Better for the environment. So there's ways that I think the market sorts itself out on this front. I'm just a big believer that if you create technology that gives the opportunity to people and markets to decide what makes sense, they'll figure it out. But I'm not trying to control markets and supplies and prices and so on. I think it's challenging. It's just too challenging. You'll be wrong one year and right the next. And, could probably debate that point, though.
Good question, Carla. Any other questions? Yeah, one back here. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, David. I listen to the podcast on a weekly basis. Great podcast.
I'm sorry.
Guys. Two questions. The first one, you're from Silicon Valley, right? Do you think Silicon Valley put enough attention and focus into ag tech as an investment opportunity? And the second question, what's the minimum buy-in for the All Besties home games?
Yeah. So on the Silicon Valley point, I think Silicon Valley probably puts too much money into ag tech. Since Climate Corp was bought, there's been like all these software and drone and like kind of niche-y businesses that got funded as if they were going to be like platform businesses. And as a result, they all got burnt out. The same happened in vertical farming. The same happened in the precision fermentation space. Arguably, there has been too much money that got ahead of its skis in opportunities in food and ag that didn't rationalize first. And as a result, the market gets burnt out, and then you can't access capital to get the stuff that is working funded. And it's really frustrating. I won't name names, but there are a few Theranos-ish examples where a ton of money went into this company and it didn't even have a positive unit economic model, it didn't even have a product. I can give lots of these examples. They burned through hundreds of millions of dollars of investor capital, and then what people don't realize about Silicon Valley, they think there's all these smart independent thinkers that are VCs, but they're not. The market likes to move together. So suddenly all these VCs are like, oh, well, that thing burnt out, this shit doesn't work, I'm not investing, I'm not even gonna look at this space. I'm going back to the TikTok competitor. So I would argue that there's probably too much money that came in too fast, and then it burnt out the market in a lot of these segments and the opportunity to kind of get to unit economics. It's also, you could blame that when you put too much money in a company, the entrepreneur wants to move fast and use that money very quickly, and then they make a lot of stupid mistakes. They scale before they have positive unit economics, for example. They don't have a customer, and they're building a product that no one wants, for example. So, those are the sorts of distortions that happen on the ground in the businesses. And then the venture market looks at it and it's like, oh, the model, generally speaking, doesn't work. Let's not fund it anymore. So arguably, we've been overfunded and been beat up in a lot of these segments that limits opportunity going forward. The home poker game is what you're referring to. A bunch of us play home poker, weekly. It's can get to be a big game. Sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars will be won or lost by a person that has had too much wine to drink and goes crazy. It's I'm not that guy. So I just sit there and hang out and drink my beer, play smaller stakes. But it can be a big game, yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah, right here. I see the mic coming.
Two questions. One was, you talked a lot about genetics editing for plants, sort of a lot of genetics on plants. What about animals? And, we still consume a lot of animal protein, so any innovation there? And then second would be, there's a lot of food waste in this country, right? So the more you produce, and you talk a lot about we're going to change the world by improving the yield and improving more we can produce, but, if half of it gets thrown away, it's counterproductive on the other side of it. So are there technology we can potentially improve shelf life or supply chain or, get less things get thrown out? Yeah,
I've not spent a lot of time on the latter. I know there's been some innovations in produce, but there's a behavioral element here that's a challenge on, remember, half our acres are used to make animal feed, which turns into animal protein. And so if you're throwing that away, it's like a multiplier on how do you preserve that, right? I don't know. I don't do anything in animals or animal genetics. I'm an ethical vegetarian, so I don't believe in animal agriculture fundamentally out of principle. So I avoid investing and trying to optimize animal agriculture with my time.
Yeah, right here.
Dave, you talked about gene editing and a lot of the kind of marketplace downstream impacts in Europe and Brazil and Mexico. What about from a competitive perspective of China and how much they're investing in gene editing in agriculture and how that might either impact your own IP or just the competitive set as you look down in the future?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? China's the biggest buyer of U.S. ag exports, and U.S. farmers and Brazilian farmers are critically dependent on the import of corn and soybeans by China. And they are trying to develop their own systems, but there are multiple challenges in the market in China with respect to capital availability and efficiency for the farmers that are farming the bulk of the acres. There's challenges with getting them to adopt new technology, right? I mean, so I think average corn yields in China today with equivalent soil to parts of the Midwest and weather conditions is like 110 bushel compared to about 175 bushel in the U.S., just to give you a sense. So that it's not just the genetics. They have access to good genetics. It's also the farm, agronomics, the investments that they're making in fertilizer and the investments that they're making in technology. And it's challenging to move that smallholder farmer market. So, everyone's keeping an eye on it. But, and as you guys may know, ChemChina bought Syngenta. They're trying to take it public right now. But, that was their play. Syngenta, which ChemChina owns, is, a distant third in these markets, and it's not got the best tech teams, and it's not very advantaged. But I don't know if you guys have followed this. I had an employee who was arrested by the FBI for espionage. He was a Chinese employee, and they caught him at the airport. He had stolen all of our nitrogen model software, and he had it on a USB disk. I don't know how the hell they found him, and they arrested him at the airport. And then there were these DuPont Pioneer employees, Chinese nationals, who were working at DuPont, and they had stolen a bunch of corn, and they were trying to bring the genetics back, and they caught those guys at the airport, and they ended up in prison. So, there's an active effort to try and catch up in China, but man, so many of the scientists want to come and work here. The best teams are here, the talent's here. For now.
Any other questions? while we're waiting, we have one right here. Yeah.
Hey, David, are you able to talk about what crops outside of the potato that you guys had recently announced you have in the works, and additionally, what crops you think would make the most impact on efficiency, on saving farmland, using less water? What are your focus at Ohalo?
Yeah, we're not talking publicly about anything. I think like all crops that are widely grown are general calorie contributors, right? So to move the needle, right, there's only a couple of crops that can really move the needle. You can make money in lots of ways, but to move the needle in terms of resource efficiency and access to calories and cost of food, et cetera, humans get calories from rice, wheat, potatoes, corn, soybeans, which are used to feed animals. And so, those are like the big crops that matter the most. So ultimately, we have lines of sight on how do we move the needles there with some of the work we're doing at Ohalo. And, those crops account for 80% of human calories probably.
Another question I had for you. I've been surprised by how often some of these weight loss management drugs like Ozempic have come up in dialogue with investors, thinking long-term about how that may impact their investment in the food sector. Can you talk a little bit about what these drugs are? Do you believe it can fundamentally change consumer habits enough that it would have an impact on the food and ag landscape? I've been surprised at how much it's actually come up.
Yeah.
I think it's partially just it's kind of the topic of the day, but do you believe
It's
it?
interesting. Like I was pretty skeptical on people having concerns about how this would impact CPG volumes, behavior, consumer behavior. So there are many studies now on Ozempic, Wegovy, et cetera, these GLP-1 drugs that show once you come off it, you gain the weight back. Okay, so you come off the drug, all of the stuff that gets muted gets turned back on, and the hunger comes back, and you eat, and you get back to your normal behavior. As a result, people have to stay on these drugs, and that's creating like a big business. Big pharma hooked population, challenging. So I think that's like certainly an observation worth noting, that people need to stay on this stuff in order to cut down on what they're buying. So if you see people go on it and then go off it, which we've seen in other dieting drugs in the past, it could kind of just cycle the other way. But if their insurance is going to pay for it, because the benefit to the insurance provider, the payer, is we're going to have less healthcare costs in the system, it's better to just keep paying these fees and let people stay on these drugs and reduce obesity rates. We could see that become a standard, that, like statins and maybe other drugs, people are just on these forever. Mm-hmm. Now, if they're not, then the food purchasing comes back. So now, how significant is this? Right now, 5% of the US population is on one of these drugs. Yeah. It's an insane number. And 60% of Americans qualify on the obesity side. So the market potential could go 12x from here. And then some purchasing data, which Walmart has commented on, shows that when people, because Walmart has the pharma data and the purchasing data. So Walmart has seen that when people go on the drugs, they stop buying snacks. The snack aisle sales are going down. So if you assume the average American today is eating about 3,500 calories per day. That number is probably 4,500 calories for someone in this class, call it 4,000 to 4,500, compared to 2,500 for someone that's off. So you're talking about a 2,000 calorie per day deficit per person that's on one of these drugs. And if you get to 10 to 20% of the US population on these drugs, you can do the math that there actually will be a sizable impact on the snack aisle for 2,000 calorie a day reduction in purchasing behavior. Right, that's like 10 snacks a day or so. If you want to get it to a CPG equivalent, it's probably $30 a day of purchasing decline. And that adds up pretty quickly, right? So by the way, I'm just making all this shit up right now. So it's like, it's like 10 grand a year per person. Add that up, right, across 20% of the population, you're talking about a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I think that's why a lot of the investment analysts are pretty hot and heavy on this thesis right now.
Right.
And they're either buying the pharma stocks, or they're buying the health insurance stocks, or they're buying or they're shorting the CPG stocks.
So you buy in then to the potential that it could have an adverse effect, at least on volume in certain segments.
I didn't believe it till I started to kind of think about like how significant this was. But
Yeah.
it is like you're cutting your calories in half.
Yeah.
And so if some number of people do that, that's pretty sizable,
Right.
right?
Right.
QSR companies too, right? The fast food guys.
Right.
So,
Sure.
yeah, it could. Now, this is a U.S. luxury thing, so
Right.
I don't know how this translates to the rest of the world, but for now,
Yeah.
that's where everyone's focused.
Yeah. Thanks. Any other questions from the audience? So I have another one. You've been fairly vocal about some of your concerns from a macro perspective around the level of U.S. debt, around interest rates. How do you see interest rates impacting both the macro economy, and then how are you thinking about in terms of investments or companies that you're starting?
Well, from a technology perspective, when you had 0% interest rates, you're incentivized to make an investment that is going to have a return 7 to 10 years out, and you can make 3 to 10x on that. But with a 5% interest rate environment, the discount rate applied 7 to 10 years out means that even if you get to 3x, it's worth nothing today, or whatever the discount is. So I'm better off making known knowns, making short-term bets in known things, because I could also go buy a treasury bond that yields 5%.
Right.
So it's really hurt the what people would call hard tech, deep tech, biotech space. The markets where you make an investment and you don't know if that investment's going to work out for 5 to 10 years. There's no incrementing of value by year where I'm getting dividends or cash flows and things are going well in the near term. And so that's why the biotech market collapsed, right? We saw biotech stocks drop by 60 to 80%. They've come back a little bit, but it's still the case that the majority or close to the majority of biotech stocks are trading below cash. Because the way biotech is funded is you put money in, and then if the company hits some technical milestones, there'll be another investor to put money in, and then there'll be another investor to put money in if they hit the next milestones, and then they'll be public, and then we'll sell it to BlackRock, and they'll buy the stock. Now that's all dried up from BlackRock all the way through. So no one wants to fund a biotech company. That's also true in capital-intensive, speculative technology businesses like in the indoor farming businesses or the precision fermentation businesses. So the fact that these companies have negative unit economics and they can't cash flow, and that you have to wait 7 to 10 years to see if they get there, makes them unfundable in this environment. Now, there's a big debate raging on, hey, are we going to stay in a 5% interest rate environment for years and years and years? Or are we going to see cuts? Guys like Bill Ackman have bet that we're actually going to see our first rate cuts in Q1. So in the next 90 days, which is insane to think about. Right. And so if the Fed starts cutting rates in Q1 and there's a market, the market is telling us in the bond market that we're going to see 3 rate cuts in the next 12 months. So, everyone's like giddy in Silicon Valley right now, like, oh shit, soft landing, this is fucking awesome, we're back, we're going to go back to it, giddy up. So people are starting to feel a little bit more, I would say, positive and optimistic from a venture investment perspective. Than they have been over the last year and a half, or 2 years actually. So that's kind of a big shift that's, I would say, underway in Silicon Valley right now. But you're not there today. You're still seeing like a lot of these markets. I mean, I've got friends that raised $1.5 billion fund, closed the fund 18 months ago. I was talking to a guy yesterday. Closed a year and a half ago. He closed a $1.5 billion fund. He's made no investments. He's sitting around. He's like, why would I invest? Like, I could wait. Let me wait. I want to see public markets come back. I want to see IPOs come back. I want to see M&A come back. I want to know that there's an endpoint. Once there's a liquid endpoint, then the capital will set up in the Series D and the C and the B, and then all these people in the early stage will start making investments again. So right now, you're seeing a lot of this like bridge to nowhere behavior in private tech, where existing investors are basically loaning money to their existing portfolio to stay alive, and being like, here's another year of runway. Let's see, here's a loan, keep it alive for a year because I don't want to take the markdown because
Right.
I'm busy raising money. I'll also tell you, like most venture capitalists are coming home empty-handed trying to raise new funds. It's a total shit show. There was one firm that had a target, and they were a really well-known top-tier firm, and they were only able to get 30% of their target raised with a huge track record, brand name, and they could only get 30% of their capital for their venture fund raised from institutional LPs, which is endowments and pension funds and sovereign wealth funds. So all the institutional capital has like gotten sour on venture. Here's another crazy statistic on why venture is also fucked. Over the last 10 years, if you bought the top 10 by market cap stocks in the NASDAQ and rebalanced it, you would make 10x your money in the last 10 years. Only, I think, 5% of venture funds have been able to return more than 3x over a 10-year period. So a lot of investors in the institutional class are like, why did I even invest in venture? Like all the value is accruing to the monopolies, to the large cap, to the technology companies that are established. Venture as an asset class may be unfundable. That's not totally true, but what you will see over the next 18 to 60 months is more than the majority of existing venture fund managers going away.
Yeah. How do you
I don't
see
know if
that?
that applies to this group, but I mean.
Do you see that having a negative impact then on capital going towards innovation, or do you think it just reallocates towards the,
No, I think
the
it's
better
great.
companies?
It's wonderful, yeah. Look, it's a clarifying effect, right? So a lot of, like we talked earlier about a bunch of these kind of Ponzi type businesses. And I mean, look at the FTX thing.
Right.
Like no one diligenced that shit.
Yeah.
Like no one went in and looked at the guy's fucking books. He didn't even have a CFO or a board.
Yeah.
Think about how crazy that is that they put billions of dollars into this thing. That's not going to happen anymore.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing.
Right.
You know,
Right.
like should all the negative unit economic businesses that are like, maybe we'll make money one day, but we're definitely not today, should they suck up the capital, or should the one company that maybe isn't growing as fast because they're not giving away money, but maybe they're growing a little bit slower, but they're making money, they should get more of the capital. And then the aggregation of talent is important that we've seen. Everyone distributes to start their own company and because they can all go raise $20 million. And when that happens, you don't get a Google. When I was at Google, it's a couple hundred people and they were top tier talent, but it was during the .com collapse that Google formed.
Right.
Google was like, you guys, I was an astrophysics major, but like, you know, stars collapse and the gravity pulls everything together and then it causes fusion. Like gas collapses and that's what causes the formation of a star. It's sort of like that. You know, you need to have these groups of talent come together and fuse, and they can't do that if the energy of capital is pushing them all into different directions because they're all being told to go start their own company. And so you don't get top tier groups. You get these kind of great leaders with maybe mediocre teams, and I think it's going to be clarifying. Yeah. So I don't think that I would be really negative on the fact that there's less money going into the venture asset class. I think it'll be more focused, better capital allocators, aggregation of concentration of capital into teams. So those are good things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I think we have time for one last question. Any question from the audience? Yeah, one over here.
I had a quick question on the genetic editing. Do you see an impact on the inputs, seeds, fertilizer, nutrition, or an impact on the flavor or texture or color of the output?
We're seeing both, right? So gene editing is being applied to increasing the productivity of plants to make them higher yielding and make, you know, more value per acre. But in specialty produce, we're seeing just like an explosion of new texture, new flavor, new color, new nutritional qualities. So these are, you know, traits that each have value in their own way in different markets. Even in processor markets, there's certain processor traits that, or processor objectives. I mean, look, on Ohalo, we did publish, so it is public, that because it's a USDA registered potato, we have a cold-induced sweetening resistant potato, which eliminates the browning in potatoes during the process. So that's valuable to processors, so the value of that finds its way through to the farm gate, to the farmer. So yeah, I think we see it all over the place.
Great. Any last thing, anything we didn't address that you think is particularly interesting relative to predictions going forward? Anything, last word? Great.
Any prediction would probably be wrong, so take it for what it is.
Yeah.
High variability in predictions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
guys.
so much for the time. Thank you.